Hello and welcome to our first town hall of the 2019-2020 biennium. I started these weekly videos last year. Many Vermonters have shared your thoughts and feedback on them. We really appreciated that. We try to have a range of topics throughout the session, from issue advocacy groups to different perspectives on the same issue, so you can really hear issues in depth from all sides so that you can help get more information. And if you want to follow these, we're going to be pre-recording them now for logistical purposes and noise. It's just a little bit easier, but we will be pre-posting on our Facebook page at VTLTGov what the topic's going to be, so you can send in your questions or topics you want us to address. You can also visit the website www.ltgov.vermont.gov, and then this will be airing on Tuesdays at 10 is when it will be posted initially. It will also be available on podcast. I would really appreciate your input. I'm soliciting comments and replies to the conversation afterwards. We can chime in and correspond with you. But let's get into who we have today. And what I'd like to start each session with is the leadership of the three major parties that are represented in the Senate chamber. I've got Senator Becca Balint, the majority leader. I've got Senator Joe Benning, who is the Republican caucus leader, and Senator Anthony Polina, progressive in the Senate as well. And we're going to take a few minutes to hear from each of them what they feel their caucus's priorities are, if they've been established yet, which they may or may not have, but the topics that are going to be really forefront in the session. So Senator Balint, I'd love to have you start.
Thank you so much for having us here today. It's hard to focus in on a couple specific issues, but I know from hearing from a lot of my constituents, I represent Windham County. A lot of women and men have reached out to me in the last few months about their concerns about the changes at the federal level on the Supreme Court and how that might affect the access that women have to abortion and other reproductive health issues here in Vermont. So it's a top priority for us in the leadership team on the Senate, as well as for many members of our caucus, not all, but for many of them who want to make sure that we are guaranteeing that women have access to the reproductive health care that they require and demand, actually. And so we're excited about that. Other issues that we'll be revisiting are the minimum wage bill that will come up again. We're already starting this work this morning in the Economic Development Committee, getting a briefing on that, as well as the paid family leave bill that we'll be bringing back up again. The governor mentioned yesterday that he also has a plan. We're eager to see his plan and to hopefully work with him to make that a possibility, more of a reality in the upcoming session. So me personally, I'm really wanting to do some work on affordable childcare this session. It's another concern, not just among so many of our families, but our employers across the state. We have many people who are not able to stay in the workforce because they can't find high quality, affordable childcare. And of course, the rural economy is critical for all of us, and all of us are outside of Chittenden County as senators, I'm saying as senators, and that is a critical issue for all of us in the Senate who represent areas outside of Chittenden County. We see on every data point on how the state is doing. If you are within Chittenden County, you are doing far better than other folks outside of that region, and so we want concerted effort on that as well. I'll leave it at that. I know we'll have a lively conversation, but those are some of the main ones that have been on the minds of the members of my caucus.
Senator Benning.
So coming from the most rural of the districts that are represented before you today, I have a group of constituents who are very much concerned about how they're trying to survive on a day-to-day basis. And trying to come to the legislature and make their voices heard is going to be somewhat of a challenge, because from the minority perspective, we don't have the numbers that we can challenge legislation that's coming through. And our priorities right now are to stay in committees, stay working very hard with folks who are trying to advance various pieces of legislation, and make sure that when those pieces of legislation come through, we've had an opportunity to constantly remind folks that there are people out there that are going to be immediately impacted by whatever is going on. And hopefully hopefully we're doing things in a way that people at the end of the day will recognize their problems have been solved, but we've also kept things under control financially. So from the Republican standpoint, we are very much looking forward to the session. We have an opportunity here to bring peace to the table, something that is not taking place on the national level. And we like to be able to think we have the ability to do that here and make a demonstration to the world at large, if you will, that we actually can work as a team and hopefully work with all these folks across the aisle and make things better for Vermonters.
Well, there's a history of that. I think we've seen in the Senate certainly many pieces of legislation come out, 27, 28, 29, and even 30 votes. And I think when you have an open process in committee and everyone does feel heard and pieces are incorporated, that makes the floor process significantly smoother. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but that's what I've observed in my years here.
You're right.
Anthony, why don't you offer some thoughts?
Sure, I would start by remembering and reminding people that Vermont is one of the few states in the country where median family income actually went down last year. Family income in Vermont today in 2019 is about where it was in 2007. So clearly the cost of everything has gone up, but wages and income have not gone up, and in fact have gone down recently. So we have to keep that in mind. So my priorities and our priorities should be to do what we can to strengthen the position of middle class and lower income Vermonters. That starts with some of the things that people are familiar with that got vetoed last year, an increase in the minimum wage, paid family leave programs so people can take time off to take care of their families. But I also want us to think further ahead and be a little bold in thinking about ways that we can help people down the road. One of them is to focus on tuition-free college for Vermonters. We have a high graduation rate, but a low number of people who actually go on to college here in the state of Vermont. One of the reasons, there's many reasons of course, but one of the reasons is that Vermont state colleges are some of the most expensive state colleges in the country. And the reason for that is that we actually provide less support to our state colleges as a state than any other state in the nation does. So we're not keeping up with our commitment to fully fund or even partially fund or adequately fund our state colleges. So I think if we were to give more students the ability to go to college tuition free, we'd see more Vermonters going to college, which obviously then helps with our economy and our future for them as families. But it also is one of the better ways to keep young people in the state of Vermont. We know that one of the best ways to keep young people in the state of Vermont is to have them go to Vermont State College. So that would be one thing that I would want to take a look at this year. The other that I think we will hear some discussion on this year, more than we have in the past, is to move as much as we can away from property towards income to fund K-12 education. Right now, 2/3 of Vermonters pay based on their income because in the income sensitivity program, those are moderate and lower income families. But the fact is that higher income families are actually paying a smaller percentage of their income to fund schools than moderate and lower income people are, which is not fair. I mean, if it's fair for a moderate or low income person to be paying about 3% of their income to fund schools, why isn't it fair to have wealthier people do the same, but instead wealthier people are paying only 0.5% of their income or 1% of their income to fund schools? So I would like us to start having a debate about how we can make our education funding system more fair, more simple, and more based on income and ability to pay. So there's other issues which we'll talk about as a group, but those are the ones that are sort of rise to the top for those of us who are progressives in the Senate.
One thing,
Yep,
based on what you were saying before,
Conversation.
that I think is important to folks know to try to bring, pull back the curtain of the work that happens in the Senate. One of the goals that the Pro Tem's office had in setting up committee assignments for this year is to make sure that there was Republican representation on each of the committees, which hasn't necessarily been the case in the past. And I think that goes to preparing bills before they come to the floor so that those really important issues can get hashed out in committee and that there can be a full vetting of ideas. And so I'm curious to see how that dynamic might change
Right.
the committee work. I don't know how you feel about that, Senator Benning.
Well, it's an interesting dynamic when you get into the committee session, but let's take an example that Anthony just gave. Anthony and I are both products of the Vermont State College system, and we've known about
That's
the
the
lack of funding since the 1970s that have been causing people a lot of heartache through the years. Trying to cure that problem, though, means you have to take what resources this state has and devote them in such a way that everybody can still, at the end of the day, afford what they're trying to do on a day-to-day basis. So we may have very big differences of opinion on how you approach the topic, but we both agree on the topic and it needs to be dealt with. And I think trying to accomplish that in a public setting at the national level would be an absolute disaster. Here, we're going to come to some consensus and try to wrestle with it in a way that it eventually solves the problem for Vermonters.
Yeah, essentially we're putting it on the table for discussion, whereas in Washington things don't even get talked about seriously. Here we know that we may not agree, as Joe says, on how to get there, but we all know that we want to get there, and so we can have that conversation in a legitimate and respectful way.
Yeah, there are so many differences between Washington and here, but one of them also is when a committee meets, the senators are actually in the room, same as in the House. Whereas in Washington, actually staffers do 90% of the work, and then with the guidance of their representative or senator. And so you actually really get to know each other as well. And that, I think, is a real benefit here in Vermont. And again, also the access for constituents to contact you, which is something that my office has really promoted a lot, is along with bumping into each other at the store and in your area, which is less common with senators than it is with representatives, just because of the number of constituents. There really is a importance of that communication and constituent service that I know each of you across all parties take very seriously and do a lot. What sort of thing do you think, I mean, the political world has talked, the media has talked a lot about sort of the big issues that maybe got vetoed last year, and what's the battles between the governor and the legislature. Maybe what did you hear in the speech yesterday that you think will maybe be different from the administration, as well as how do you see differences in whether it's the makeup of the committees or each of you and your caucuses view this session that might be a little different than it was 2 years ago?
Well, I think in the past, the Republican Party in Vermont has been known as the no because group. I think you're going to find a lot more yes if coming from our section of the woodwork, and trying to get some consensus. We recognize that the numbers are there, that we have to do something to contribute to the conversation in such a way that produces a result, but we're probably not going to be in the position of being confrontationalists. We just can't afford to be. So I think that's a great change from in the past, and you heard a lot of that in the speech yesterday.
I think so.
The intent of at least my caucus, and I believe in the House as well, is that we're going to try to reach across the aisle and have conversations to figure out if there's a way we can reach some kind of consensus. So let's take a topic. Let's take minimum wage, for instance. I know that if you're in Burlington on Church Street and you go to buy this cup of coffee, well, yours is tea, but if you're buying that cup of coffee and it's, let's say, costing you $4 at a kiosk on Church Street, the foot traffic on Church Street ranges from about 300 to 500 people a day. So the chances are pretty good if you're going to reach $15 an hour for minimum wage, you could probably do that in a kiosk on Church Street in Burlington. If you come to Lindenville, however, and you have a coffee place on the corner, their foot traffic is going to average about 30 to 50 people a day tops, and you're selling the same cup of coffee. So my job as a minority person in a committee discussion is to constantly point out there's a difference in how you want to reach your objective, whether it's going to have an impact at your part of the state that's different than my part of the state. Can we reach consensus somehow? We recognize that people...
Just for clarity, I now don't have a part of the state. I'm the whole state, but just
well, you live.
I do live. I'm having fun, but
I know that the differences between where you live and where I live.
That's right.
Requires me to step into the picture at committee level and say, I have to represent my constituents. I have to talk about the fact that you may actually have an impact on the employer who is employing one person and can't manage the foot traffic because it just doesn't exist. So that person has to make a decision. Do I continue to do business? Do I fire my employee, which puts us back even further in my neck of the woods, or do I double the cost of that cup of coffee, which increases the cost for the very same people we're trying to help protect? So it's a spiral that, we don't have the votes to override what is going to be done, but we want to be part of the conversation to talk about why these things are important and what the impact might be. Becca brought up earlier the talk about child care availability. In my neck of the woods, 2 years ago, we did something all of us thought was a very good thing. We instituted a program where we thought daycare aged kids should have access to high quality daycare. And we put into play a set of regulations that we thought were going to have great consequences. But the reality is, in my neck of the woods especially, there was an inability of people to locate the licensed professionals that were necessary or pay them because they just didn't have enough income to do that. So if you take Essex County, which is just next door to me and right on the Connecticut River, the impact on the home care providers has been horrible, absolutely horrible. So it's my job as a minority person to come in and make sure we have a conversation that includes everybody across the state.
I think the governor also is going to have to be more cooperative this year than in the past, given the fact that he no longer has the ability to probably have vetoes upheld. I think that's an important signal. And I think even though the governor won his re-election handily, we also saw that given what happened to legislative races and other statewide races as well, that the governor's message didn't really resonate with Vermonters, because if it had, it would have had coattails and it would not have lost so many seats in the House and some in the Senate. But I think Joe's right in talking about the inequality that exists between different parts of the state. I think that's really important, and we all have to try to recognize that and do what we can to make sure that we spread what wealth there is around as much as possible. You know, we have a lot of income inequality and wealth inequality within the state, which I think people do realize, but what we're seeing now is more clear is that the inequality between different regions of the state is really important. And if we're going to have policies that work for Vermont, they have to work for all Vermonters. And not everybody can end up driving into Burlington or moving into Burlington to find work. It doesn't make sense. We have to be creating jobs in other areas of the state.
And housing.
Right, housing, exactly, so that people can live and work in the same communities where they want to, and not have to get in their cars and drive to Chittenden County every day, which is not only an economic disaster, but an environmental disaster. So I think the idea of having economic development spread more evenly throughout the state is really important. I think it's really difficult, quite honestly. I don't know how we're going to go about doing that, but I think slowly but surely sort of rectify that inequality in the economy.
I want to give you a chance to also talk about what you saw in that speech, but I think one of the things you pointed out was sort of the Chittenden County. It's sort of the Chittenden County and an orb around it. Parts of Franklin County, Washington, you know, that have also become economically more stable, not right on. But the other piece to what both Senator Benning and Polina were mentioning in terms of the two Vermonts, and you mentioned it, you're down from Brattleboro area, is what are the issues Vermont's facing in its rural area? And there's often a discussion saying, well, they're caused because of X, Y, and Z policies. And I think certainly the child care one is a little more clear thing that we've all seen. We passed this, that happened. But if you look at rural areas all across the country, they're facing some of the same issues. And one of the things that I heard from the governor's speech that I really was excited to hear, and I think he really nailed it, was there was a company in the Northeast Kingdom that was looking for engineers. And he pointed out that that company, as opposed to a company, I think it was in Virginia, that was also looking for engineers, the one in the Northeast Kingdom found applicants and was able to hire a lot more folks, looking at an innovative way to market where those, where to find the candidates that would want to move to Vermont. And he was actually, he didn't articulate it this way, so I'm gonna rephrase it, and maybe that's in my frame as opposed to his. But it was the very qualities of Vermont that many of our past policies have kept in place, not being overdeveloped in certain areas, or having public and private lands that allowed the mountain bike clubs to build the trails. Maybe they're all in private, you would know better than me, but the point is, what that company did was they put an advertisement, for those that didn't hear the speech, in a mountain biking magazine that they were looking for engineers. And apparently they got good applicants and a good application rate. So his speech, moving in the direction of what are the great things Vermont has? This actually, for rural schools to rural schools, we have very good rural schools. Whereas in the past it's been our taxes are too high, which we have to address. It's also what do we have to sell to the outside? What did you see in his speech? And then we're going to actually have to start wrapping up, believe it or not.
So I was, much like what Senator Benning said earlier, I think the governor signaled pretty clearly that this is going to be a new style of governing for the next 2 years, much more collaboration with the legislature as a whole. Because it doesn't just break down along party lines. Sometimes it breaks down along administrative lines. You've got the executive branch, you've got the legislative branch. There was not a whole lot of communication happening between those two branches last year. And that was, I think, disappointing for many senators and House members, not just in my party, but across the spectrum of political beliefs. So that made me really hopeful. The other thing that I hope will be a byproduct of him signaling that tone from the beginning is I'm hoping we will get more secretaries, deputy secretaries, and commissioners to speak more with us in committee about the work that needs to be done. There were specific times in my committee work, specifically on economic development and education last year, when we asked for specific information from the administration, and they were not as forthcoming as has been the policy in the past, or rather the protocol in the past. And so I'm really hoping to see a change there, because we do better work when we're working together than when we're working adversarially. The other piece to the rural economy that I just don't want to forget, because it's critical, not just specifically for the rural economy, but also for bringing in more Vermonters. We have to finally deal with our connectivity issues, period. We have to do it. There's no way around it.
Right,
So,
and we've sometimes seen promises in the past, I'm gonna get to every corner in 3
it's
years or
tough.
5 years.
Yeah,
I think we have to, A, set realistic goals,
yeah,
but B, work to get there. So we may not get broadband to every corner in the next year or 2, or even 7. Although rural electrification, when the
Right.
will was there and the public said we needed to do it,
Right.
we found the money to do it. But at the same time, we could do a much, much better job, and I think you're absolutely right. It's interesting, in terms of the working together, I've had an administrative secretary in my office in the last couple of days, and they did indicate to me prior to the governor's speech that we would see more of them. And I think there is that sentiment, if others have talked with some of the secretaries and commissioners.
I'm in that loop, actually.
So I think it's gonna be good.
The governor's staff has been divvied up, and they all have assignments to various committees in the legislature, so I think you're gonna see a lot more day-to-day contact.
that's great.
And that's really helpful because the administration has information, just raw data, through the agencies around these important topics, whether it's water quality, wages, employment, that as citizen legislators, we don't often have.
Right.
And so that's helpful for whatever the outcome is gonna be. So that's, I think everybody across the parties is probably pleased to see that. Is that
Yeah, very
accurate?
much so.
Yes, absolutely.
It'll be better for Vermonters, for those of you viewing,
Yeah.
and who care. So we're actually gonna start wrapping up.
Okay.
We may have another one of these, but I just want to mention a couple things that are coming up at the State House. The first is starting on Thursday, January 17th at 4 p.m. in the State House cafeteria. There'll be a reception and talk by Tim Brooks, who is a Vermonter who has done a lot of work around trying to create and work with the native populations around a written language that would have existed or would represent the history here in Vermont. He's got this book, but also up in the State House cafeteria, there's on display, usually for about a month at a time, a different rotating display. And this month, that's happening. So on January 17th at 4, if you want to come to the reception, please do. And then we will also be continuing the movie series that my office has started once a month on the 4th Thursday. They're in the State House cafeteria during the session. The first one will be January 24th. At 5:30, folks will come together. At 6 o'clock, we're going to show the movie. It's called Reinventing Power, and it's a documentary about the positive effects of renewable energy, not just from an energy footprint, but also working to help the economy in many of the areas where installations are occurring. And then we'll have a panel afterwards, as we always do, with a question and answer period. And finally, Friday mornings from 8:30 to 10, this office will again have its open coffee hour, hour and a half. For anybody to walk in, it's a lively discussion with ranges of perspectives on issues. We're going to try to post a follow-up from that each week on our Facebook page so people know what people are bringing to the State House. And sometimes they visit here and then go on to meet with their own representatives, senators, or visit committees. And I know that's tough. A lot of people are working. That's just a tough challenge no matter what. But if you have a flexible schedule, you are welcome to come. We provide you coffee and snacks. You can find more about this on the website, ltgov.vermont.gov. I want to thank Senate Majority Leader Becca Ballant, Senate Minority Leader Senator Benning from Caledonia County, and Senator Anthony Polino with the Progressive Party from Washington County for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.